John was enjoying a welcome mid-morning break when he was the victim of a vicious street crime. It cost him several £1,000s, but it wasn't until the next day he realized the enormity of it. All he can recall is responding to a text from what he thought was his bank, urgently asking him to verify his security details. Moments later, he'd been robbed in broad daylight.
You can't see cybercrime, but there are ways to avoid it. At Barclays, we'll never ask you to verify your security details by text.
Before we get to any of that, though, let's go straight over to Mike Graham's Monday regular, the excellent Mail on Sunday columnist Peter Hitchens. Good morning, Peter.
Good morning.
Can I get your take, before we get to the subjects of your column yesterday, can I get your take as a former Russian correspondent on the Ukraine situation? It seems sort of eerily exactly the same as when we last discussed it last Monday. All the Western leaders saying the invasion is imminent. It will happen within hours. He's mobilizing for war, and then nothing happens. How do you see it today?
Well, it's still the case that it may be so that he's doing so, but in that case, he's stark staring mad. I can't see what benefit he would gain from it. It would almost certainly bring his government down. The international reaction to an unlawful invasion of a neighboring country would be such that it would do enormous damage to Russia and no benefit. I can't see how, if I don't doubt the Russian army is capable of gaining the ground and quite possibly of taking Kiev. But how would they hold it against a population which doesn't want them there and which would undoubtedly be helped in its resistance from outside? It's a nonsense. So if Putin is mad, then let's expect an invasion. Otherwise, you have to wonder what all this is about. What seems to me, friends of mine who know more about this than I do, say the most significant development at the moment is what looks like now the permanent stationing of Russian troops in Belarus. So Belarus is theoretical independence from Russia, which has always been quite considerable in terms of foreign policy, looks as if it may well come to an end, which means that, oddly enough, the new combination of Belarus and Russia will have a border with NATO. I'm not sure who that suits, but it's a huge development, and I think it's almost certainly been brought on by the rather bumptious and aggressive policies of Western nations, NATO, the United States and the European Union since really the early part of this century. That seems to me to be a more interesting development than the alleged invasion of Ukraine.
But of course, if Putin does roll his tanks into Ukraine, the brave people of that country, which we tend to depict as something like the Isle of Wight, as if there's about sort of 60,000 of them ready to take on the mighty bear of Russia. There's more than 40 million people live there. It's a vast country. So it isn't quite the plucky little minnow that we like to depict it as. But of course, the brave people of Ukraine are ready to defend. Even grannies, who are training with guns. The BBC reported on this, and you reported on the BBC's reporting of this in your column yesterday. Tell us what you spotted that evidently the BBC didn't or decided to ignore.
Well, who knows? You'd have to ask them, and their main response to this when I asked about it was no comment. But what happened was that they showed this film. They showed a lot, actually, on the Sunday and the Monday night, I think 13th and 14th of February. One of their correspondents had been to this town of Mariupol, which is in Ukraine, but quite close to the as it were, the separatist frontier, and a place where there was serious fighting after 2014, and saw there some civilians, including a lovable old great-grandma, aged 78 or 79, depending on reports, being shown how to use a Kalashnikov. And the people showing her were members of a body called the Azov Battalion. It has other names as well, and their shoulder flashes carry a symbol called the Volksangle, which in various forms was used by many sorts of Nazi organization and indeed Nazi movement. And the Nazi movement in the Netherlands used it during the Hitler period. And it's a well-known Nazi symbol in that part of the world where people understand what these things mean. And these people are actually notorious for having very strong neo-Nazi connections. Well, another broadcasting organization called Euronews went to the same scene and managed to mention that the Azov Battalion were neo-Nazis, but the BBC somehow or other completely failed to notice and transmitted this thing as if it was just some nice soldiers giving tuition in warfare to some nice civilians. As soon as you see the neo-Nazi element of it, then you begin to wonder. My point about this is really, why does the BBC, I can't believe there's nobody in the BBC's journalism, editorial, production departments who doesn't know this. Why did they not report it? And I think they don't report it because there's this general understanding now in the reporting of the Ukraine-Russia conflict or confrontation that Russia is an evil empire like Mordor in the Lord of the Rings, and Ukraine is some kind of shining city on a hill utopia where nothing ever goes wrong. This is such complete rubbish. It's beyond belief to anybody who knows the area. Both Russia and Ukraine are fantastically corrupt countries. Their democracy is decidedly dodgy in both cases. The freedom of their media is equally dodgy, and they're both big messes as countries. And Ukraine undoubtedly contains a quite strong ultra-nationalist element, which has not always been as hostile to neo-Nazi ideology as you might like. And once you realize this, it ceases to be the sort of black versus white, Batman versus the Joker cartoon conflict, which most British media are portraying it as. And I think good, because people should. But that I think is why the BBC almost certainly did not report it, and why I thought I should raise it. Not because I think all Ukrainians are Nazis, because obviously millions of them are nothing of the kind, but because it's time that the reporting of this whole business was much more grown up. People understood it's far more complicated out there than they've been led to believe by this ludicrous, simplistic, open-mouthed reporting which we're being subjected to.
What do you think is going on at the BBC generally in terms of its journalism? Because, it never ceases to remind us of its marvellous status when it comes to the best broadcasting organisation in the world that it calls itself. And yet, lately, editorially, they've made all sorts of questionable decisions. After amid the Virginia Giuffre case against Prince Andrew, they brought on as a commentator Alan Dershowitz, and neglected to mention that he was one of the people accused of benefiting from Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking business. Of course, Mr. Dershowitz denies it, but it needed to be pointed out that this man was involved in the case, and yet they didn't. Why was that?
Well, I'll pass over that. I know very little of that particular aspect of life. But I think in the Times this morning, there's a story about the BBC getting rid of increasing numbers of experienced staff. There is a clear-out taking place. This may be one of the reasons why almost every time I listen to the so-called flagship Today program, they try to call somebody up and they say, "Oh, terribly sorry, the line's gone wrong." They can't even ring people up at the BBC anymore and keep them on the line. They keep dropping off. It's a simple thing for a broadcasting organisation, especially one funded by a gigantic £1 billion poll tax, could actually manage to make phone calls or indeed other sorts of connection and keep people on the line. They can't even do that anymore. But it's not just that. And I think there's a clear out of people at the senior level, the old style BBC people, who actually in most cases genuinely believed in the principle of impartiality. And they've been replaced by a new generation who've not been trained in that in anything like the same way, and who don't really believe in it, and who are much, much more committed to a generally leftist, radical, pro-EU, pro-green, globalist agenda, and indeed very much lined up with the sexual revolution and everything that's going on there as well. And they've just taken over. It's noticeable for me because I used to be often with grim dagger-like stares allowed into the courts of the BBC and occasionally allowed to near their microphones. And this has almost completely stopped in the past 3 or 4 years because the corporation simply is no longer prepared to put up with dissent from people of my kind. It's actually in their charter and agreement that they should do so, but they just don't want to bother. I think that a lot of people now in probably their late 50s and early 60s who upheld the older standards of the BBC, both technically and professionally, and in terms of impartiality, are leaving and being replaced by an entirely new generation of people who don't care about those things at all, and frankly aren't as good at them either.
And those of us who are old enough to remember the BBC in its more traditional incarnation will know that the modern BBC bears no resemblance to what the BBC was like in the 1980s or even the 1990s. It has changed beyond recognition, and not for the better.
There's another thing about this which is fascinating. Quite a lot of BBC reporters in the era in which my mind was formed in many ways, the era of the Vietnam War in the late 60s and early 70s, reported with obvious great strain to maintain impartiality, but they were sceptical about the claims of war, and they reported the facts about the Vietnam War and the problems of it. It seems to me, looking back on it now, as someone who was very left wing at the time and thought the Vietnam War was a crime, and was dissatisfied with the way the BBC reported it then from a different direction. Even so, I think the reporting was far superior to the reporting of any foreign crisis we see now. Far less willing to accept the propaganda of the belligerents. Far more sceptical about claims. And I think that's gone, and I think it's a great shame, because it was a vitally important part of all journalism. And I think that's in many parts of the media. It's not just the BBC. A willingness to doubt what government tells you is absolutely essential in any reporting at all. And there isn't anything like enough of that. The current reporting of the Ukraine crisis, if somebody says Putin is about to invade Ukraine, this is pretty much reported as fact.
Yeah. And as we found out, it's not fact.
Well, so far, I keep saying, I'm not saying it won't happen, because I'm not in a position, I don't know, I'm not inside the mind of Vladimir Putin, but nor is Joe Biden. Anything but, I would have thought, or indeed Alexander Pfeffel, Boris Johnson, or Liz Truss, or Liz Truss, as she's known in Russia. They don't know what's going on in Putin's mind, but they behave as if they do, and this is what strikes me as really peculiar.
It is peculiar. Stay where you are, Peter. We'll pick up this conversation after these messages. I'm talking to Peter Hitchens, columnist for the Mail on Sunday. I'm Kevin O'Sullivan, and this is Talk Radio.
Talk Radio. Playing the money. Talk Radio.
Could we get rid of this unacceptable music, please? This isn't the Teletubbies. I'm talking to Peter Hitchens. He's the Mail on Sunday columnist. Welcome back, Peter. You also wrote in your column about this appalling post office scandal, seen as one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in recent British history, where almost 700 sub-post mistresses and sub-post masters were accused and many prosecuted for allegedly stealing money from the post office, when it was all down to a computer system called Horizon. Now, some of these people went to prison. One woman, I remember, was 4 or 5 months pregnant when she was sent to jail. But many of them had their lives ruined. Many have still not recovered. 33 or so of them have died since this all first started unfolding, some of them through suicide. Now, the bosses of the post office at that time, including Chief Executive Paula Venables, don't seem to have been punished in any way for this saga. There are calls now for her to be stripped of her £5 million that she made while she was chief executive of the post office, and while she insisted that it wasn't it was the Horizon system that was right, and these hundreds of sub-post mistresses and sub-post masters who were all telling the same story, saying, no, there's something wrong with the computer. She would not listen, nor would anyone else at the post office, but she remains unpunished, and nor do any of the other executives. I know we're having this public inquiry. Is it leading towards punishment for the people who cause such misery on such a vast scale?
I'm not so keen on punishment for them as that they should show penitence and repentance and regret. I think that people make mistakes, and obviously people did make terrible mistakes in this case. And I know that Private Eye magazine was very prominent in picking this thing up from the start, and all credit to them for that, and other journalists did too. But it wasn't, for quite a while, it wasn't as big a scandal as it should have been, probably because people find it very hard to believe. I don't tend to demand the imprisonment or hounding or punishment of people who've done things wrong. I think that there are occasions when there's no alternative, but really when someone has made a terrible mistake, I don't think there's a willful desire to chuck all these people into prison and ruin their lives and have them disgraced. If someone's made a mistake of that scale, I do want to hear them say that they are sorry, and not they're sorry if, or they're sorry because, or they're sorry because other people were unhappy. Say they're sorry for what they did and for what they failed to do. And maybe they should then go off and do what John Profumo did after his scandal and go and do some charitable work among people who really need to be helped, or something of that kind. I don't want to throw into prison. I don't know quite what prosecution you could have of them anyway. I just want some sign that these people understand just how horrible it is for an innocent person to be publicly disgraced, described by the legal system as a fraud and a criminal, in some cases actually put into prison. It's very hard to go to prison in this country if you're a violent criminal. You have to keep on trying. It's much harder to get into prison than to get into university. But these people, in many cases, actually ended up being locked up in a place of shame and humiliation when they had done absolutely nothing wrong. And many of them didn't live, or their parents or their friends or their neighbors didn't live to see them vindicated. And so they went, this thing continues unresolved. You can't give back years of ruin and misery of that kind. They've gone forever. And so compensation is obviously necessary, and I think there should be enormous compensation paid to these people precisely because of the need to state that they were wholly innocent and badly treated. But if those people who were involved don't realize that they need to go publicly and offer the most tremendous level of it's not for them to have things taken away from them. It's for them to offer to give things back that they took when they were doing this thing that seems to me to be important. Proper recognition that all of us need to make on many occasions in our lives. I have to say, proper recognition that what we have done is wrong, that the remembrance of it is intolerable and can't be borne unless they make proper confession of what they've done. Honestly, I want to see that. I think that would be good for everybody involved. Nothing will bring back what was lost by those punished, but at least that would, in some ways, clean up our national life. But my real point is that these things happen, in my view, because we've ceased to doubt.
Yes, they would not doubt.
Ukraine. We don't doubt anymore. If someone's accused of something, we assume they're guilty.
Yes. I mean, hundreds of these people, well, all of them, were telling exactly the same story. It's not us, it's the computer system. And in the face of nearly 700 people saying, well, we didn't do anything, we think it's the computer, they decided to go with the computer. And for that, we require an explanation, we really do. I agree with you, Peter. Last point, really, it is quite a big story in England this week. We're getting our freedom back. They're going to lift all COVID rules, regulations, diktats and restrictions that have been dominating our lives for the past 2 years. I mean, it seems to me it's the right thing for Boris to do. He could have done it earlier. Do you think he's going to get away with what the Tory party maintain about him? That yes, he's made small mistakes, Partygate, etc., but on the big issues, he's been proved to be right all along. I don't think he has been proved to be right about lockdowns at all.
What's increasingly emerging, and on the Lockdown Skeptics site today is a very interesting article, a new book on this by one of those involved. It's increasingly plain to those who really understood what happened that shutting down the country was the wrong response in the first place. So no, he hasn't been right all along. The only problem with that is that in mainstream British politics, nor has anybody else. If Sir Keir Starmer had been in charge, we'd still be, as far as I can see, completely shut down, probably wearing spacesuits. I don't know what would have happened if Labour or the Liberal Democrats had been in charge during this. It's been bad, but there's no doubt they could have made it worse. So where does one turn? There's no point attacking Johnson for it unless you can offer some alternative. Well, all I know is that when I said, and I still maintain some perfectly sensible things, suggesting that there were some doubts about this policy 2 years ago, immediately I was hosed down with slime from all directions, and treated as if I was some sort of thought criminal. And that was the way it was. And again, people need to learn from that. They will not doubt what they're told. They're much too willing. It's as if you want to go and live in the People's Republic of China, where they tell you what to do and monitor your behavior and take away your right to get on the bus or go out in the evening if you don't behave properly. If you want to go and live somewhere like that, go and live there. But this is a country with Magna Carta and a Bill of Rights and centuries of freedom, which will only continue to exist if you assert it. So now we're supposed to be free. I go out in the streets of my hometown and there are people wearing face masks in howling gales. They like it. And the problem is that will people, when given back their theoretical freedom, take it back in practice, or will I still be going to Marks and Spencer's in 6 weeks' time and find myself surrounded by people masked up like bandits? How long will this go on for? People have enjoyed being told what to do far too much. Because people have given in. It's the same with the post office. Somebody says so-and-so is guilty. If the authorities say he's guilty, then the magistrates agree and the judges agree, and they don't stop trials, which it seems to me they should have stopped, and juries don't refuse to convict. They just say, oh, right, so the authorities say these people are guilty. Let's send them to prison. Let's ruin their lives on the basis of what authority says. I think the spirit of this country, if it has any spirit at all, should surely be, no, authority isn't always right. We have to say that sometimes we don't necessarily agree and demand some proof and also demand some thought, and also say to Her Majesty's opposition, have you noticed the name that you have? Particularly the man who's actually paid to be leader of Her Majesty's opposition. Opposition means you have to oppose, not do the same thing as the government. If you can't be bothered to do that, then go and do something else. Go and be, Director of Public Prosecutions or something like that. Yeah. And do it in courts where there are independent juries, which sometimes throw out the cases you prepare because they aren't good enough.
Couldn't agree with you more. The opposition has been very strange throughout the last 2 years. They've been agreeing with the government all along. Peter, I've enjoyed our conversations over these last 2 Mondays. Thank you once again for your time. Mail on Sunday columnist Peter Hitchens there. Mike Graham will be talking to him again next week. But really good column and very good to talk to.